For more than 20 years, Evelyn had lived as if she were invisible to her own daughter. Her name was Evelyn, a quiet grandmother from Texas who had always stayed in the background of her family's life. She wasn't the type to argue or demand attention. She spoke softly, listened more than she talked, and carried her worries in silence. She raised her children with patience and love, but as the years passed, she began to feel like a shadow in her own home, someone people only noticed when they needed something. Her daughter, Monica, had grown distant over time. First it was subtle. Missed phone calls, short replies to long messages, canceled plans at the last minute. Evelyn told herself Monica was just busy building her life. But soon the small gaps became wide silences. Sunday dinners stopped. Holidays came and went without invitations. Evelyn would see smiling photos online, family gatherings, birthdays, vacations, and realize she hadn't even been told about them. Once, she waited 3 hours at a cafe on Monica's birthday, only to learn her daughter had forgotten the plans entirely. Evelyn went home alone, carrying a small wrapped gift that was never opened. Evelyn tried not to take it personally. She blamed herself for being too quiet, too gentle, too easy to overlook. She sent messages anyway. She left voicemails that were never returned. Each unanswered call felt heavier than the last, but she never complained. She believed love meant patience even when it hurt. Her husband, Robert, was the opposite of invisible. He was a wealthy man who had spent his life building something from nothing. Through decades of work in real estate, he built a fortune few could imagine. $4.7 million spread across investments, properties, and savings. People respected him. They listened when he spoke. Yet at home he was kind to Evelyn, often reminding her that quiet strength mattered just as much as loud success. Still, Evelyn never cared much about money. She cared about family. But money has a way of exposing truths and uncovering secrets people try to hide. One quiet afternoon, Evelyn received a phone call that changed the rhythm of her life forever. Robert had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The house felt suddenly too large, too empty, too silent. Grief washed over her in slow, aching waves. But beneath the sadness was another feeling she couldn't ignore. A quiet dread. She knew the family would soon gather for the reading of the will. And she knew what money did to people. Deep down, she feared this would reopen every wound she had spent years trying to quietly endure. Monica called that night for the first time in months. Her voice was polite, distant, almost rehearsed. She spoke of arrangements, of schedules, of legal matters, but not once did she ask her mother how she was holding up. Evelyn hung up the phone and sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Robert used to drink his coffee every morning. As the day of the will reading approached, Evelyn told herself not to expect anything. She had grown used to being overlooked. She assumed the money would go to Monica, or perhaps be divided in ways she didn't understand. She didn't want wealth. She wanted to feel remembered, to feel like the years she had spent supporting her family quietly, faithfully, had meant something. The morning of the reading, Evelyn chose her favorite blue dress, the one Robert had always said made her eyes shine. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her necklace. She wasn't dressing for attention. She was dressing for herself, as if to remind her own reflection that she still mattered. The lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Daniels, welcomed them into his office. The air felt tight, heavy with unspoken expectations. Monica arrived with confidence, her expensive handbag resting on her arm. Her posture relaxed as if she already knew the outcome. She barely glanced at her mother before taking a seat. Evelyn felt the familiar ache in her chest but kept her eyes lowered, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Good afternoon," Mr. Daniels began. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Robert James, who passed peacefully last week." The room fell into a tense silence. Papers rustled. A clock ticked loudly on the wall. Evelyn's heart beat so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She braced herself for disappointment. She had done it many times before. "All debts, taxes, and final expenses have been paid," Mr. Daniels continued. "The remainder of Robert James's estate, totaling $4.7 million, will be distributed according to his wishes." Monica leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright with anticipation. Evelyn stared at the floor. To my daughter Monica, the lawyer read. I leave my car collection and the home on Cedar Lane. Monica's lips curved into a confident smile. She glanced at her mother, not with warmth, but with the quiet pride of someone who believed they had just won something. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She nodded gently, as if she had expected nothing more. And to my beloved wife Evelyn, Mr. Daniels said, pausing long enough for the room to hold its breath, I leave $4.7 million in cash and investments. I also leave you the vacation property in Lake Travis. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Monica's smile vanished. Color drained from her face as she stared at the lawyer, waiting for him to correct himself. Evelyn felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. The words didn't feel real. For a moment, she wondered if she had misheard. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She simply closed her eyes and let the weight of being seen settle into her heart. It wasn't about the money. It was about the message Robert had left behind. In his final act, he had made her visible. Monica opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The room no longer felt like it belonged to her. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. No excuses. No confidence. Just silence. Evelyn sat quietly, her posture unchanged. She didn't smile in triumph. She didn't look at Monica with anger. She simply felt a calm she hadn't known in years. The quiet woman who had been overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten had been recognized in the one place that mattered most. That day, Evelyn learned something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Silence does not mean weakness, and patience does not mean being invisible. Sometimes life rewards the quiet heart in ways no one expects. Monica felt the room tilt around her as the words echoed in her mind. $4.7 million. All of it going to her mother, the woman she had quietly pushed to the edges of her life for years. The number rang in her ears loud and unreal. She forced a smile, the kind people wear when they're trying not to fall apart in public, but her fingers curled tightly into her palm. Her hands were trembling. Every layer of pride she had built over the years suddenly felt thin, fragile, like glass stretched too tight and ready to splinter. Mom, this can't be real, Monica whispered at last, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. The words stumbled out of her, tangled with jealousy, shock, and a sudden unfamiliar fear. She had always assumed her father's fortune would naturally become hers, that everything he had worked for would land in her hands the way sunlight falls through an open window. She had built her future around that quiet certainty. Now, in a single sentence, that certainty had collapsed. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't look away. She met her daughter's gaze with a calm that came from years of swallowing hurt without complaint. It's real, Monica, she said gently, her tone steady but firm. Your father chose this. I never asked for it and I never expected it. But this was his decision, and I intend to respect it. The air in the room felt tight, as though even the walls were listening. Relatives shifted in their seats, whispering to one another behind cupped hands. Some glanced at Monica with uncomfortable sympathy. Others looked at Evelyn with a quiet, new respect, as if they were only just now noticing her presence. The silence between words felt heavy, expectant, as though something deeper was about to break open. Monica's husband, Daniel, cleared his throat, trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping from him. There has to be some kind of mistake, he said quickly, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maybe the lawyer can go over it again. Surely there's some misunderstanding here. This is a lot to take in. No mistake, Mr. Daniels replied, his voice firm and unwavering. The will was reviewed thoroughly and legally verified. These are Mr. James's final wishes. The distributions are accurate and binding. The last of the color drained from Monica's face. She sank back into her chair as if her strength had been quietly pulled from her. The room blurred around her. Memories rose without warning. Her mother standing alone at family gatherings, unanswered messages left on read, invitations she never sent, calls she meant to return and never did. She remembered choosing convenience over kindness, distance over effort. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, and for the first time she felt the full cost of her neglect. Evelyn sat still, her hands folded in her lap. Inside, emotions stirred. Sorrow for the years of quiet loneliness, relief at finally being seen, and a soft ache for the relationship she had always hoped might be different. She felt no triumph, no desire to prove anything. What she felt instead was recognition, a deep, steady acknowledgement of her presence, her loyalty, her years of loving in silence. "Mom, I should have," Monica began, her voice breaking apart before the sentence could find its ending. The apology hovered between them, incomplete but heavy with meaning. Evelyn gave a small nod. She understood the words even without hearing them. Some realizations came too late to be spoken easily. Mr. Daniels continued through the remaining details of the estate. Additional investments, quiet stock accounts Robert had managed over the years, smaller properties and funds that together amounted to hundreds of thousands more. The numbers filled the room, but Evelyn barely heard them. To her, the inheritance was not about wealth. It was about security, about dignity, about being valued after years of feeling overlooked. After the reading, the family gathered awkwardly in the living room. Conversations tried to start but quickly faded. The air buzzed with tension. Monica avoided her mother's eyes, twisting her wedding ring around her finger, her movements restless and uncertain. A few relatives attempted polite smiles and shallow comments, but nothing felt natural. Evelyn sat quietly with a warm cup of tea resting between her palms, her posture calm, her presence steady. She had learned long ago that silence, when paired with dignity, could be more powerful than anger ever could. As people slowly began to leave, Monica lingered behind. She stepped closer to her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I don't even know how to begin," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I treated you badly. I shut you out. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until now." Evelyn placed her hand gently on her daughter's shoulder, the touch light but certain. "Monica," she said softly, "I forgive you, but this isn't about money. It never was. It's about love. It's about time. It's about choosing to see each other while we still can. Let this be a beginning, not another reason for distance or resentment." Monica nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. The truth settled into her in a way it never had before. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking at her mother as someone who would always be there no matter what. She saw her as a woman who had carried hurt quietly, who had endured absence without bitterness, and who still offered grace. News of Evelyn's inheritance traveled quickly through extended family and distant relatives. Some reacted with shock, others with envy, and a few with newfound interest. Friends called with congratulations, while whispers followed behind closed doors. Evelyn noticed it all but let none of it disturb her peace. She had learned that money didn't change people. It revealed them. And she no longer felt the need to earn anyone's approval. That evening, Evelyn sat alone in her study, the house finally quiet. She opened a small worn photo album and traced the edges of old pictures with her fingertips. Smiling faces from vacations long past. Birthday candles. Children growing older in small silent steps. The memories filled the room with warmth. She realized in that quiet moment that life had come full circle. The woman who once felt invisible now held quiet power. Not through wealth, but through resilience, patience, and grace. In the weeks that followed, Monica began to show up in small, unexpected ways. Short visits turned into longer conversations. Small gestures replaced long silences. The change was slow and imperfect, but it was real. Evelyn did not rush forgiveness. She welcomed effort. She understood that trust, like love, grows through consistency, not sudden promises. Evelyn's story began to ripple outward into her community. Other quiet women, grandmothers who had spent years standing in the background of their families' lives, reached out to her. She listened to them with the same patience she had always carried. She encouraged them to claim their space, to honor their voices, and to hold their dignity with pride. Her experience became a quiet beacon. Proof that being gentle does not mean being powerless. And so, Evelyn stepped into a new chapter of her life. She was no longer just a quiet grandmother from Texas. She was a woman who had endured being unseen, who had been tested by neglect and silence, and who had emerged grounded, respected, and strong. The $4.7 million she inherited was not just money. It was a symbol of recognition, one that reflected the worth she had always carried, even when no one else seemed to notice. The days following the will reading unfolded in ways Evelyn had never imagined. Word of the $4.7 million inheritance spread faster than she expected, not only through immediate family, but outward into distant relatives, old acquaintances, and even neighbors who had barely spoken to her before. Her phone rang constantly. Messages stacked up. People she hadn't heard from in years suddenly found reasons to check in. Some offered sincere congratulations. Others asked polite questions that carried the sharp edge of curiosity. A few masked envy behind warm smiles and careful words. Monica struggled to adjust to the sudden shift in the family's balance. The daughter who had once kept her distance now appeared at Evelyn's door more often, carrying flowers, small gifts, and gestures that felt unfamiliar but earnest. Evelyn welcomed her each time without bringing up the past. She didn't scold or accuse. Instead, she used every visit as a quiet chance to rebuild something that had been broken for too long, believing that trust grows not through punishment, but through patience. Not everyone was comfortable with Evelyn's new position in the family. Her son-in-law, Daniel, remained guarded, his politeness thin and his questions frequent. One afternoon, he finally voiced what lingered beneath his careful tone. "Are you absolutely sure the will is valid?" he asked, forcing a tight smile. "I mean, $4.7 million is a lot of money. I just want to be certain everything was handled correctly." Evelyn met his gaze with calm steadiness. "Daniel, your father-in-law was very clear about what he wanted," she said gently. "There's no confusion, and there's no dispute. This is exactly how Robert chose to leave things." Even with her reassurance, Daniel continued to circle the subject. He asked about bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the vacation property at Lake Travis, as though the details might reveal some hidden flaw. Evelyn answered each question without defensiveness, her voice steady, her posture relaxed. Years of being underestimated had taught her that patience is often the strongest response to suspicion. As days passed, extended family members began to surface, each carrying their own quiet expectations. Cousins who had once passed her by at gatherings now lingered in conversation, asking about her plans, her future, her intentions with the inheritance. Some floated ideas of partnerships in business or real estate, speaking as though her fortune were already partly theirs. Others hinted at favors, small requests wrapped in casual friendliness, testing how far her generosity might reach. Evelyn listened to them all with polite attention, but she made no promises. She had lived long enough to understand that money does not change people, it reveals them. She guarded her peace carefully, choosing not to rush into decisions that would bind her to the desires of others. What mattered to her remained unchanged: her family, her independence, and the quiet freedom she had earned after decades of putting everyone else first. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a law firm whose name she didn't recognize. It suggested there might be a dispute concerning one of Robert's smaller properties. For a moment, her heart tightened with worry. She breathed deeply, reminding herself that she had nothing to fear. She called Mr. Daniels right away. His voice was calm, practiced, reassuring. "Evelyn, this is not unusual," he explained. "Sometimes distant relatives attempt to challenge estates. Everything is properly documented and legally verified. You're fully protected." Even so, a thin thread of unease lingered. She had already seen how the promise of money could shift attitudes, soften voices, and sharpen hidden motives. The inheritance, she realized, was not only a gift, it was a test of character, boundaries, and self-respect, not just for those around her, but for herself as well. Then came an unexpected visit. Robert's longtime friend Michael, who had known him since college, appeared one afternoon at her door. He held a small worn box in his hands. Michael had always been kind to Evelyn, often calling her the steady heart of the family. "Evelyn," he said softly, "Robert wanted you to have these. He told me if anything ever happened to him, you should know just how deeply he appreciated every sacrifice you made, every quiet strength you carried." Evelyn opened the box carefully, her fingers trembling as she lifted the first envelope. Inside were letters written over many years, filled with gratitude, love, and admiration. Robert had written about her patience, her resilience, the way she held the family together without ever demanding recognition. Tears gathered in her eyes as she read his words, the ink carrying feelings he had never fully spoken aloud. In that moment, Evelyn knew the letters were worth more than any amount of money. They reminded her that the true measure of wealth is not what we accumulate, but the love we leave behind and the respect we earn through quiet devotion. But the tensions did not fade so easily. At a family gathering not long after, a distant cousin named Vanessa, who had always harbored envy toward Monica, let bitterness slip into her voice. "It's only fair," Vanessa muttered, her eyes sharp. "Robert worked hard his whole life and Evelyn, well, maybe she doesn't need all of it." Evelyn turned to her with composed calm. Her voice was low, steady, unshaken. "This isn't about what seems fair to you," she said quietly. "It's about honoring my husband's wishes. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to live my life with dignity." Vanessa, unsettled by Evelyn's composure, stormed out of the room. Some relatives exchanged glances, surprised by Evelyn's quiet firmness. Others felt a sense of relief that the moment hadn't erupted into open conflict. As the weeks unfolded, Evelyn began making careful, thoughtful plans for her future. She had no desire to display her wealth or turn it into spectacle. Instead, she focused on securing her comfort and independence. She met with financial advisors, reviewed investment strategies, and quietly explored ways to support local charities. Giving back felt more meaningful to her than showing off what she had received. Through it all, Evelyn noticed the change in Monica growing steadier. The daughter who once avoided her calls now lingered over tea, staying longer than planned. Their conversations stretched into the evening, filled with hesitant laughter, shared memories, and moments of honest vulnerability. Monica spoke openly about her regrets, about how easily she had taken her mother's presence for granted. Evelyn listened without bitterness, allowing healing to move at its own pace. What they were rebuilding was not based on money, but on mutual recognition and care. One quiet evening, Evelyn reflected on everything that had unfolded. She realized that $4.7 million had given her more than financial security. It had brought clarity. It had revealed sincerity where it existed, envy where it lingered, and manipulation where it hid. Most of all, it had reminded her that patience, dignity, and resilience leave marks far deeper than money ever could. As her story spread through the community, people spoke of Evelyn with admiration. They noted her grace under pressure, her steady composure amid family tension, her ability to navigate sudden change without losing herself. To other women who had spent years feeling unseen or dismissed, she became a quiet source of strength. And through every twist and challenge, Evelyn held on to one simple truth. The inheritance was only a number written on paper. The real wealth she carried was peace in her heart, respect she had earned through years of quiet endurance, and the love she had given, long before anyone thought she had anything to offer. Evelyn knew, deep in her bones, that her life had shifted in a way that could never be undone. With the $4.7 million inheritance, she no longer had to worry about bills piling up, debts weighing on her shoulders, or the quiet fear of being overlooked and dismissed. Yet it wasn't the money that mattered most to her. What she wanted was her voice back, her independence, the simple, steady respect she had gone without for far too long. She began making careful, thoughtful choices. The Lake Travis property, a quiet lakeside home Robert had loved, became her personal refuge. Evelyn walked through each room slowly, imagining soft colors, warm light, and spaces that felt safe and welcoming. She spent long afternoons planning small renovations and choosing simple furnishings, nothing extravagant, just touches of comfort that reflected her own taste. It became a sanctuary where she could breathe freely, away from judgment, expectations, and the lingering tension of family drama. But peace rarely arrives without resistance. Some family members continued to test her boundaries, unable to accept the shift in her position. Vanessa, the cousin who had once threatened to contest the will, returned one afternoon with the same sharp energy she carried before. She paced the living room, her voice tight with resentment. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa snapped. "Robert's estate should have been shared more fairly. You've taken everything, and you know it." Evelyn lifted her eyes calmly, her teacup resting steady in her hands. "Vanessa," she said quietly, "this isn't about taking anything from anyone. It's about honoring the man I spent decades of my life with and respecting his final wishes. I won't fight you. I won't argue with you. His decision stands, and I will live my life with dignity." Vanessa bristled, her frustration flaring. But Evelyn's composure left her with nowhere to direct her anger. For the first time, Vanessa realized that intimidation had no power over someone who had endured years of silence, neglect, and quiet endurance. After a few bitter words, she stormed out, the door closing behind her with a sharp finality that left the room peaceful once more. Monica, meanwhile, continued her careful attempts to rebuild what had been lost. She called more often, shared pieces of her daily life, and even asked her mother for guidance on investments and decisions she didn't fully understand. Evelyn listened with patience, offering advice without judgment or lectures. She began to see that the inheritance had brought more than financial security. It had opened a door for healing, one honest conversation at a time. Evelyn also started searching for ways to give her money meaning. She made quiet donations to local charities, helped fund scholarships for students who reminded her of her own children when they were young, and supported small community projects that often went unnoticed. She did all of this without seeking recognition, but word of her generosity traveled anyway. People began to admire her not for the wealth she had received, but for the integrity with which she chose to use it. One afternoon, a call came from a distant nephew she barely knew. His voice carried nervous hope. "Aunt Evelyn," he said, hesitating. I didn't expect to reach out like this, but I'm trying to start my own business and I don't know what I'm doing. I could really use some guidance." Evelyn smiled, memories of her own struggles rising gently in her chest. "Of course," she replied. "I'll help however I can. Just remember, success isn't built on money alone. It grows from patience, hard work, and integrity. Those things matter more than any shortcut ever will." Even Daniel, Monica's husband, began to shift in his attitude. He watched how Evelyn handled pressure, how she set boundaries without bitterness, how she navigated challenges without needing to dominate a room. One evening he admitted quietly, "Your strength is impressive. I misjudged you." Evelyn answered only with a small, knowing smile, her silence carrying more wisdom than any speech could have. Not every challenge was emotional. A minor dispute arose with a bank over transferring several investments, forcing Evelyn to wade through dense paperwork, legal language, and meetings with financial advisors. She approached it all with steady focus, asking questions, taking notes, and learning quickly. It became clear to everyone involved that her calm resolve and life experience outweighed impulsive decision-making and the hunger for control. As months passed, Evelyn's life settled into a rhythm shaped by independence and peace. Monica's visits became warmer, less strained. Family members who still came around did so with a clearer understanding of her boundaries. Evelyn often reflected on how strange it was that the inheritance she once feared would fracture her family had instead revealed true character, and in some ways, strengthened the relationships that were willing to grow. She also chose to invest in herself for the first time in years. Cooking classes filled her afternoons with laughter and new flavors. Old hobbies she had set aside found their way back into her life. She joined a local art club, discovering joy in creating something simply for the sake of it. Life, she realized, wasn't meant to be narrowed to money or family tension. It was meant to be lived with curiosity, purpose, and quiet joy at every stage. One evening, sitting on the porch overlooking the still waters of Lake Travis, Evelyn wrapped her hands around a warm cup of tea and thought of Robert. In the hush of the evening, she could almost hear his voice urging her forward. Live fully, love deeply, and never shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. She understood then that the inheritance had given her more than security. It had given her permission to step into the life she had always imagined without fear, apology, or compromise. The final challenge arrived without warning. Vanessa attempted one last legal maneuver through a distant relative's attorney, hoping to unsettle what she could not control. Evelyn met with Mr. Daniels, who reviewed the documents carefully before meeting her calm gaze. "Everything is airtight," he assured her. "There's nothing to contest. Robert's wishes are clear, and your rights are fully protected." When Vanessa saw the official responses, the sealed documents, and Evelyn's unwavering composure, something in her finally gave way. She understood at last that she could not pressure or intimidate a woman so grounded in her own worth. For Evelyn, it was a victory not defined by money, but by patience, integrity, and the self-respect she had carried quietly all along. Months had passed since the reading of the will, and Evelyn's life had slowly, quietly transformed. The once overlooked grandmother from Texas now carried herself with a calm confidence that naturally commanded respect, not because of the $4.7 million she had inherited, but because of the dignity and steadiness she had shown through every test placed before her. Monica, too, had changed in ways that surprised even herself. The shock of realizing that her mother would inherit the full estate forced her to confront choices she had long avoided examining. She began spending more time with Evelyn, not out of obligation or guilt, but from genuine remorse and a sincere desire to rebuild what she had damaged. "Mom," Monica said one afternoon as they sat together in the soft light of the living room, "I've been thinking about everything. I treated you unfairly for years. I ignored you when you needed me. I took you for granted, and I'm truly sorry." Evelyn reached for her daughter's hand, her touch warm and steady. "Monica, what matters is what we choose to do now," she said gently. "Apologies are words, but it's our actions that rebuild trust. I'm grateful you're here with me today." Slowly, carefully, they began to heal. They spent long afternoons together at the Lake Travis property, cooking simple meals, laughing over small mistakes, and talking about life in ways they hadn't in years. Evelyn even invited Monica to help plan modest charitable donations from her inheritance, teaching her daughter that wealth is most meaningful when it lifts others and gives back to the world beyond itself. Reconciliation rippled outward through the family. Relatives who had once been distant, dismissive, or quietly envious began to see Evelyn in a different light. They recognized that the woman who had once blended into the background had become a pillar of quiet wisdom and strength, someone whose choices were guided by thoughtfulness, rather than impulse or pride. Even Vanessa, the cousin who had once tried to challenge the will, eventually retreated from her bitterness. Witnessing Evelyn's composure and the steady support of the family around her, Vanessa quietly stepped back. Their relationship remained strained, but the attempts at intimidation ceased. For Evelyn, this brought a sense of closure, not just in legal matters, but in the emotional weight she had carried for so long. With her new freedom, Evelyn invested in the parts of herself she had once set aside. She joined art classes, spending peaceful mornings painting the changing light over Lake Travis. She volunteered to teach basic financial literacy to women in her community, offering practical guidance with patience and encouragement. The $4.7 million inheritance had given her freedom of choice, but she chose to use her time and energy to enrich the lives of others, not just her own. One evening, Evelyn sat quietly on the porch overlooking the lake as the sun sank low, coloring the sky with soft oranges and pinks. She held a warm cup of tea in her hands and reflected on the journey that had led her here. From years of being overlooked, through moments of tension and family conflict, to a life shaped by independence and peace. The path had not been easy, but it had shaped her into someone stronger and more grounded than she had ever realized. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Monica stepped outside, holding a small, time-worn box. "I found these," she said softly. "They're letters from Dad, from when he and I were younger. I thought you should have them too." Evelyn accepted the box with careful hands. Inside were letters filled with love, guidance, and small memories of her husband's hopes for their family. Tears gathered in her eyes as she read his familiar words. The letters, paired with the inheritance, were a quiet confirmation that Robert had always seen her, not just as the keeper of the home, but as the heart of it. "Thank you, Monica," Evelyn whispered. "Not only for the letters but for being here with me now. This matters more than any amount of money ever could." Monica nodded, finally understanding that the inheritance had never been about greed or control. It had been about recognition, respect, and the kind of love that endures even through years of distance and silence. As time went on, Evelyn's story became known throughout her community. People spoke of the quiet grandmother who had endured neglect, navigated family conflict, inherited millions, and still remained gentle, grounded, and kind. Her journey inspired other women to speak up for themselves, to recognize their worth, and to move through life with patience and integrity. Evelyn found deep fulfillment in mentoring younger women, helping them navigate complicated family dynamics, careers, and financial decisions with confidence. She became living proof that even after years of being unseen, it is possible to begin again, to grow, and to leave a meaningful mark on the world. In the end, the inheritance was more than money. It was a turning point, a catalyst for change and a reminder that patience, integrity, and love can outlast resentment, envy, and neglect. Evelyn had gained financial security, yes, but more importantly, she had gained peace, purpose, and a renewed bond with her daughter. On a quiet evening by the lake, Evelyn smiled to herself. Life had finally met her patience with reward, her resilience with recognition. She had faced envy, family conflict, and long seasons of silence, and emerged stronger, wiser, and respected. Her story became a message for all quiet grandmothers who had learned to endure in silence. Speak when you need to, stay patient when you must, and never underestimate the power of dignity and grace. Life may be unpredictable, but in time, truth, love, and perseverance find their way into the light. And for Evelyn, this chapter closed not with noise or spectacle, but with peace. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. She was valued. And at last she was free. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe the channel,